True North is an original podcast by Due North PR. We do everything we can to ensure that everything we broadcast is fair and factual, but the opinions expressed and statements made by our guests are theirs and theirs alone. These opinions and statements do not reflect the views or opinions of our presenters, Due North PR, or the podcast itself. You're listening to True North, a regular roundup of business and community news and developments in Northland. Hello, and welcome to the second episode of True North. Thank you for taking the time to listen. It's Wednesday, the 9th of April. I'm Peter Heath. On the show ahead...
Let's leave it at mid-decade. I think mid-decade is a good term to go with.
I speak with Ocean Flyer CEO Shah Aslam to get an update about his plans to launch an innovative 40-minute sea glider service between Whangārei and Auckland. First, though, a look at what's happening in business and community news across our region. Northland's application for regional deal funding from central government has been published by the region's economic development agency, Northland Inc. City and Regional Deals is the government's initiative for establishing long-term agreements between central and local government. The programme's intention is to secure long-term commitments, funding and resource opportunities to support councils to make improvements in their region, for example, to roads, infrastructure and the supply of quality housing. Each deal is unique and focuses on the city or region's strategic priorities for economic resilience and growth. The deals are awarded on a competitive basis, and the recipients of the first tranche are expected to be announced in late May. The Northland application is interesting. What's striking is that it's less about a straight-up ask for cash and more about outlining what central and local government could do and need to do to enable, coordinate, and support the development of underlying infrastructure. This, the application argues, is what's really needed to realise the potential for economic growth across the region. It identifies 4 key strategic areas of economic growth that will benefit from greater alignment between central and local government investment and a greater degree of joined-up thinking between key government agencies. These are future energy projects clustered around Marsden Point, marine manufacturing projects clustered around Whangārei, primary sector projects mainly across the west, mid and far north, and visitor economy projects right across the region. What we found particularly interesting, and which hasn't been reported on widely yet at all, were proposals in the application to establish not 1, but 2 special economic zones in Northland, not just the one at Marsden Point, which we covered in detail last week, but also a second at the Nafa Innovation and Enterprise Park near Kaikohe. The lure of cheap electricity has failed so far to attract the hoped-for tenants at the park, so maybe a preferential tax rate and other financial incentives will do the trick. There are other notable asks in the application, and we're really surprised that these haven't been picked up on yet by mainstream media. Perhaps they haven't read the document fully. These include a request for a portion of GST generated within the region to be retained within the region to support local economic development projects, and for the development of smarter immigration and investment settings that will result in a targeted and responsive immigration framework to attract talent to where it's required. The document stops short of asking government to implement a regionally variable personal tax rate, but throw this in and we'd start to look and feel a bit like Australia. I think it's a great plan. The New Zealand Transport Agency, Waka Kotahi, has opened its system to organisations interested in delivering the first section of the Northern Corridor, the Warkworth to Tahana leg. Detailed design and construction is expected to start in late 2026. We'll post a link in the show notes that Northland firms can use to register their interest. I'm delighted to confirm that we're scheduled to speak with Steve Mutton, NZTA's Director of Regional Relationships for Northland and Auckland, about this in our 14th of May episode. I'll be asking him about what Northland businesses should be doing now, other than registering their interest, to take full advantage of this all-too-rare economic opportunity. And finally, some interesting news has been coming out of Wellington in the area of workplace safety. Workplace Relations and Safety Minister Brooke van Velden said the government intends to change health and safety rules so that if a business complies with approved codes of practice, it will be deemed to have met its health and safety obligations. At the moment, if a business doesn't comply with an approved code of practice, this can be used as evidence that it has failed its legal obligations under the Health and Safety at Work Act. But, on the other hand, compliance does not give a business any protection under the Act. In another proposed simplification of the Act, Cabinet has agreed to narrow its focus as it relates to small enterprises to risks that could cause death, serious injury, or illness. Minister Van Velden said small, low-risk businesses were unsure of what risks to focus on and that these changes would help reduce the burden and cost of over-compliance. And, in a development that will certainly draw sighs of relief from board directors across the region, the government will clarify the distinction between governance and operational responsibilities for compliance with the Act. Minister Van Velden said business owners and company directors were unclear about their health and safety obligations under the Act. The changes she was seeking to implement would specify that the day-to-day management of health and safety risks should be the responsibility of an organization's senior management team, leaving directors and boards free to focus on governance and strategic oversight of the business. So for several years now, a company called Ocean Flyer has been putting its head above the parapet of New Zealand's transport sector. It plans to introduce a brand new type of transport to the country, something called a sea glider. This is basically an electric-powered aircraft that skims over the surface of the ocean, using the cushioning effect of the air between its wings and the water to reduce drag and increase range. Back in June 2023, Ocean Flyer signed agreements with Northport and Northland's Regional Economic Development Agency, Northland Inc., aimed at making Whangārei the first, or one of the first at least, destinations in Ocean Flyer's plan to connect regional centres around the country. That was nearly 2 years ago. At the time, Ocean Flyer expected delivery of its first 5 sea gliders from US manufacturer Regent at some point in 2026. That's no longer 3 years distant, of course. It's next year. So with me today is Ocean Flyer CEO Shah Aslam to give us a bit of an update on where things are at. Hi Shah, and thanks for joining us on True North.
Good afternoon, Peter. Thank you for having me.
So, when can Northlanders expect to be zipping down the coast between Whangārei and Auckland? Is it looking like next year still?
It's not far now. We were aiming for mid-decade, and I think now that we're in 2025, we're still staying true to those timelines. And we look forward to having these sea gliders zipping up and down the country.
So, 2026, or are we looking 2027?
Let's leave it at mid-decade. I think mid-decade is a good term to go with.
Okay. All right. So pretty shortly though, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Excellent. So listen, is Whangārei still among your list of the first destinations in your network? And why Whangārei? Of all the regional centres you could have chosen, what caught your eye about Northland, Shah?
I think if you look at the geography of New Zealand, Auckland is the biggest market. The closest region to Auckland, or one of the closest regions to Auckland, which requires efficient connectivity, is Northland/Whangārei. So from that point of view, when we came out with the concept of sea gliders, we looked at the regions that would benefit the most, I guess, as a starting point from efficient, affordable, and fast travel. And that's where Whangārei kind of, was up there in that list. And we started engaging. We reached out to Northport. We reached out to Northland Inc., the community, the businesses. And as you mentioned in your opening, introduction, that we've got MOUs in place with Northport, who've been very supportive. Some really good conversations with John Moore, who's the CE, and then Northland Inc. as well. They've backed us. They've introduced us to the right people. And so all of those things as a new venture, new concept in transport, all of those things help guide the way for us as well, where we see some of the first routes. And if it's fair to say, if things continue as they are, then Whangārei is definitely up there to potentially be, if not the first, then one of the first routes.
So who else would be in the running?
If we come further down the coast, I think Tauranga is a good candidate as well. Again, fast, efficient, affordable transport straight into Auckland Viaduct. The biggest advantage for people is you're getting from city center to city center in a way over there. So with the high frequency schedule that we're looking at for sea gliders, you can essentially get to work in Auckland in the morning, And if you want to head back home at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, there'll be multiple sea glider trips available. And again, people have asked me often what the demographics or the user case for the sea glider is. And I think the biggest advantage or the biggest thing that I like about the sea glider is that there's no one particular user case. It could be for corporate, it could be for businesses, it could be for people communicating for educational services, health services, life events. And I think from that point of view, our operational model is also to keep it as convenient as possible, as affordable as possible. At the end of the day, it is about the customer. They're the ones riding on the sea glider, and we want to make sure we do everything we can to make it a fun, enjoyable, and safe ride for them.
Okay. Is it predominantly an East Coast service, Shah? I mean, presumably to make it a West Coast, there'd be some overland involved, which presumably these machines don't really deal with particularly well.
I think you're putting me in a difficult position if I said I'm going to ignore West Coast, but I think it's fair to say at this stage that it'll be connections from East Coast city to East Coast cities, and then when we look at the West Coast, it'll be between West Coast cities and West Coast cities.
Yeah, okay.
But then you have you have things like Wellington to Nelson as an example. You've got New Plymouth into Wellington or Whanganui into Wellington. So those routes kind of take advantage of both sides. The beauty of New Zealand and why sea gliders also work is that most of our major cities are located on the East Coast. And I think from that point of view, from what we've seen in our weather analysis as well, the East Coast is slightly sheltered, so slightly calmer seas compared to the West Coast. So there's a lot of benefits in operating in the East Coast. Hence, at least as a starting point, the first couple of routes will be on the East Coast.
Shah, how do you expect Air New Zealand to respond? They've got a pretty solid track record of pricing any regional competitors right out of the market. What's your survival strategy? How do you plan to compete with them in terms of product, price, and place?
Well, I think the first thing we need to actually identify is if Air New Zealand actually treat us as a competitor. As you're aware, sea gliders are regulated by the maritime industry, and I think in New Zealand, regulations are taken very seriously in terms of where people sit. So we've often heard the term that even though you're flying fast, you're just another maritime operator, which is a good thing for us. Physically, literally, and in this case, figuratively, we'll be flying under the radar. So I think then Air New Zealand has no reason to compete with us.
Oh, but you're still a transport competitor, right? People are jumping into a thing and going from A to B.
Absolutely, and I think that's where the efficiencies of the sea glider come into play. So from our point of view, looking at Whangārei, Auckland, the travel time is about 35 to 40 minutes. We're looking at a cost of below $100 per one way. We're looking at coming straight into the viaduct. We are not looking at 30-minute check-in times. Essentially, it's kind of like a train service, bus service. You show up, you put your bag in the back, you jump on a seat, even if you're a minute out from the takeoff time, and away you go. So I think those key elements, as I mentioned earlier as well, the sustainability, efficiency, affordability, and speed of the sea glider, I think make us a very strong competitor. So with respect to your question, I don't think I need to be worried about the survival strategies. I think it's Air New Zealand who need to be focused on the survival strategies in a way.
Very well said.
Don't get my membership cancelled. I do fly with them.
Listen, when you announced the agreements back in 2023, it became clear that Northport, as you've said, would become your Whangārei terminal. Why aren't you able to use a location further up Whangārei Harbour, closer in towards the CBD?
We are still exploring those options, and the good thing there is that we're exploring those options in collaboration with Northport. So they've come up with some ideas as well that potentially would benefit the larger population upstream a little bit. The challenge there there's a couple of challenges. Low tide is one. The second challenge is that once we cross essentially Northport, speed restrictions start to apply as well. So suddenly that time from, let's say, 35 minutes can go up to 40, 45, 50 minutes even. What that means is then your ticket price starts to go up as well. So from our point of view, it's a balancing act to make sure that we can maximize getting people from Auckland to Northland as much as possible. And I think that's where Northport became a very strong competitor. So I think from our point of view, that triangle is how do we get people there in a fast, efficient manner, but also make it affordable. And that's where the triangle fits for the likes of Northport, because we're not spending that extra 10 or 15 minutes getting all the way in. that allows us to keep it affordable and allows us to keep it fast.
Yeah, but then you've got the commuting time. The commuter still has to get from the CBD up towards Marsden Point, which can take a real, it can take a lot of time. So isn't that just eroding into those efficiencies that you were talking about?
It is a little bit, but I think as you'll find it that if we were to go all the way into the city or as close to the city, that would impact two things. Number one, it would impact the reliability of the schedule because there are more days when there is low tide versus high tide. So I think that's one of the key things. So there'll be more disruptions for passengers. Number two, when we talk about the cost, and we've done some high level comparisons, I think the cost will outweigh what it will cost, let's say, you to drive from Whangārei down to Marsden. But if you look at the overall picture, especially in those busy mornings, where it's taking people 3.5 hours to get down to Auckland, and those busy afternoons where it's spending another 3.5 hours to get back, we can still reduce that 7-hour time frame down to about 35 minutes each way with a 20 to 25-minute drive. Overall, I think the experience will still be better. And when we do talk about work-life balance, health and safety, I think you'll appreciate and realize that driving 20 to 25 minutes to Marsden versus a 3.5-hour drive to Auckland is still better.
There was some discussion about putting an electric water taxi on between the Town Basin and Northport. Is that still a possible thing?
Well, absolutely. And look, I know from what I hear, conversations are happening with the relevant authorities in Northland and Whangārei, but I think that will require the wider support of the community and whatever we at Ocean Flyer can do to support that concept, we're definitely behind it. And look, that's another example, right? It is changing people's trends. So I know that concept or conversations of that concept around the city circle for our electric ferry were happening even before we announced. And I think it's fair to say that since Ocean Flyer announced Sea Gliders, that conversation has picked up speed and momentum a little bit more. That allows Marsden to develop more as well because all of a sudden people have access to Marsden, be it for, just as a tourist activity, entertainment hub, just going to Marsden for dinner, pretty much, and then going back home. So all these opportunities open up, and I think the perfect scenario would be if there was an electric ferry connecting the wider cities just straight into Marsden, and then you get to Northport, you jump on a sea glider, and away you go. And for that purposes, I've said to Marsden Maritime Holdings, Northport, the council as well, that look, if we need to align our ticketing system, our timelines with that electric ferry service, we most definitely will.
The region is a large area, and travel from places like Kaitaia and Monganui to Whangārei is even more challenging by road than possibly between Whangārei and Auckland. So you've spoken about connecting New Zealand regions. Do you have any plans to link centres within regions like Northland? And if so, sort of how long after your initial launch do you see that taking place?
I think we definitely want to. So from my point of view, I'm agnostic to which regions, which centers we're connecting as long as they are helping people and as long as the business case is viable. So I've had a couple of conversations up in Whangārei with our other councils up Northland as well. And I've said the same thing to everyone. Let's sit down and discuss the business case. If there is a demand for X number of people on a daily basis, connecting further up Northland into Whangārei and then into Auckland, then that's definitely worth exploring. Last thing I want to do is promise into a region and then commercially not be viable and pull the service. That's not good for the region. That's not good for us. That's not good for the wider population. So I need to be careful which regions we target. Hence, as a starting point, we are looking at regions where we feel and the local councils and businesses are saying there is a demand. Now, the reality of any business is that we sit here and forecast. The reality is once we launch the service, we might be undersubscribed, we might be oversubscribed. That's just part of any business in any industry. But we got to take practical, logical steps and look at the forecasting out there available to us, and that suggests that there are a lot of people that commute between Whangārei and Auckland on a daily basis, and there are people who would like to commute on a daily basis, but they can't right now. And I think as we're seeing, not at the moment, but historically, the trend has been an upward trend in property prices in New Zealand, especially as we are seeing the main centers like Auckland get more and more congested, more and more busy, more and more expensive. People actually are preferring to move out into the regions but commute into Auckland. Right now, that's not really possible. If you pick any region, right, even when I say Tauranga, when I say let's talk about Hamilton. I know it's in road. You talk about Northland, you talk about Coromandel, Whitianga, Whakatane, all of those places. It's not easy to commute into Auckland on a daily basis. Now, if in some of those places where the infrastructure allows and they are shoreside places or cities, we can connect them straight into Auckland, you will see a change in the trend. And I think while we're saying that most of this will benefit in some way, shape, or form people coming into Auckland, you'll see it will benefit a lot of people within Auckland as well. And so that's the aim from our point of view. But we haven't closed any conversations. We're open to all conversations, and I'll take this opportunity to encourage councils as well to reach out to us with some sort of a business case, and tell us what the potential demand could look like.
The whole concept of a sea glider sounds like a great idea. It's quick, it's clean, it's convenient, but there's going to be a natural reluctance on the part of travellers to trust a brand new technology like this, isn't there? And I'm keen to know, what kind of research have you done into the scale of that reluctance and how best to overcome it?
The reluctance is going to be there. Even now, we're part of aviation with Air and Napier, and over the last 5 or 6 years, we've seen it. There are people who are reluctant to even fly on the regional aircraft with Air New Zealand because they only want the jets. They don't want to fly on turboprops. So I think it'll be naive of me to sit here and say that I've got 100% hit rate. There's going to be always some reluctance. There's going to be always a group of people that we won't, unfortunately, be able to pick up. And that's fine. We understand that. Then there's a second group of reluctance, people who are going like, look, let's see how it goes over the first 3 to 6 months, see it flying around New Zealand, and then we'll definitely jump on it. And then we've got a good, strong group of people who are going like, look, this is perfect, it makes sense, we'll jump on it. I think the overcoming of the reluctances, and as we've seen with technology, there is a right time and right place. And I think in New Zealand, if you look at our current infrastructure on transport, it is, I would say it's beyond fragile, it's fractured. We don't really have rail. We're not really making use of the Blue Highway, which is the water outside, beautiful piece of infrastructure we have. We're not making use of public transport because outside of Auckland, even in Auckland, it's pretty much non-existent. It fails on a regular basis. New Zealand has become too expensive, and again, reliability issues are starting to creep up for them as well. So when you look at the transport infrastructure, you can either bicycle from Whangārei to Auckland, which is going to take you hours and hours, or you can drive. And so, there's plenty of cars that I see every time I've driven up to Whangārei, which have one individual. But, they're driving down because they have no other option. So I think being in the right place at the right time, I think that's critical. And that will definitely push people off the line who are a bit skeptical. And then I think when it comes to safety, new tech, but definitely in a safe environment. And I think we need to take a lot of positivity and comfort from the fact that Regent, who are developing the Sea Glider, they're coming from an aviation background. Billy and Mike, who are the co-founders of Regent, they've got a lot of experience, and they're not rushing through it. They're making sure that they get everything right. There's going to be a lot of testing that's going to happen before these things start seeing the day of light. And that's what they've been doing over the last 3 to 4 years, right? They've been designing, testing, changing the design, refining the design. They've been working closely with the U.S. Coast Guard, who's the certifier and regulator of these things in the U.S. Maritime New Zealand as well. We engaged with them early on before we even announced. They're working closely with the U.S. Coast Guard. They're working closely with Regent. So I think there's a lot of comfort to be taken from the fact that these things will be safe. Then when we talk about part of the reason of safety is when people cut shortcuts. Well, Regent are strongly funded. They've got backers from different walks of life, which includes some of the larger airlines like Japan Airlines, Hawaiian Airlines. They've got some big funds overseas who are funding them. So I think I'm certain of this, that between Regent and between Ocean Flyer, we're not going to do anything that's going to compromise the safety. Safety will always be number one.
Yeah.
So we'll ensure it's a safe operation. I think those are the elements that give people confidence in us, and the fact that we come from an aviation background. So technically our aircraft are flying at higher speeds than the Sea Gliders at the moment. We're used to this. This isn't new for us. The only difference is it's just closer to the water.
Yeah. You make a good point about the lack of options. They say necessity is the mother of invention. I think equally true to say that necessity is the mother of early adoption. So
Absolutely.
look forward to seeing some of that. You also in a previous answer mentioned sort of discussion with councils and people about sort of negotiating various things. Your sea gliders will be electric. That's a large part of the attraction from the traveler's perspective, especially from the perspective of a corporate travel manager with a company's ESG credentials in mind. But as NZME's Chris Keel wrote back in 2023, industrial strength fast chargers don't come cheap. Now, that's a massive piece of infrastructure that you'll be needing at each of the points in your network, I assume, if Chris is right. I think he used the example of Auckland's ferry electrification projects, pointing out the $30 million price tag for industrial strength chargers on wharves. Shah, is this an operational cost that you've built into your business model, or will you be expecting your infrastructure partners at your regional destinations, people like Northland, to make this investment in return for enhanced regional connectivity? How's all that going to work?
Yeah, look, so the first thing is I think AT is pretty notorious for blowing budgets they've never kept within. So I would disregard the 30 million they're spending as a comparison, being frank with you. The reality here is the range of the Sea Glider on a nice day, I wouldn't call it perfect, but on a nice day, we can technically do Whangārei, Auckland, and back without having to recharge at the other end. And that speaks volumes to wing and ground effect. That speaks volumes to the battery tech that is developed and continues to develop over time. And the agility of the Sea Gliders in the way Billy and Mike have designed them is such that, as time goes by and better battery tech comes out, we can take advantage of that. So we're not stuck with old tech. So that's point number one. Point number two is, reason we've chosen the ports is because a lot of the ports around New Zealand actually have, I wouldn't call it spare capacity, but have high speed and enough capacity to take on the Sea Gliders. And so I think from that point of view as well, you'll see that when we do go, and we've had some of these conversations with the key players around Auckland and Whangārei and Tauranga, you'll see when we go to implement these chargers and stuff, most of these places will have access to power. We just need to plug in the charger. Now, I'm not saying it's as easy or as simple as that, but we will work with our key stakeholders, which includes the ports, which includes the infrastructure partners. But look, without naming any, there are new technologies around New Zealand that are being developed as well to combat or fight this issue of capacity, I guess, or overload on the grid. And we're looking at 3 or 4 different situations where how do we take advantage of the grid overnight when most of the country is sleeping, less reliance on the grid or less capacity issues of the grid. So during the daytime, we're not a burden on the grid. We're looking at different aspects of how we can make our operation efficient. But also what has helped on the flip side, the likes of the Auckland electric ferry or the ports, around the country wanting to electrify, and this move that or shift that has taken over the past 3 to 5 years, that helps us as well. And again, I'd like to say that, if Northport is one of the routes that we end up doing from Northport to Auckland, and if we can get everything across the line and build the infrastructure, that infrastructure, as I've said on multiple occasions, is not just for us. That's for everyone. So if your electric ferries start operating, they take advantage of that infrastructure. If Northport decide that they want to go down the path of electric tugs or electric boats, they take advantage, right? If anyone else wants to operate, the big cruises coming in who have a large need for heavy capacity electricity, they take advantage. So this benefits multiple modes, not just us as Ocean Flyer. And I think that's the beauty of this, that anything we do or anything anyone else does at these ports or shoreside infrastructure benefits everyone who uses it.
Yeah, okay. Let me just try and tease out that fact. That I guess the nub of the question is: will you be requiring some form of infrastructural investment on the part of your destinations?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Everybody needs it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, listen. This has been really interesting. Thank you for being one of our first guests on True North. I hope you're able to share the heck out of the pod and encourage others to come on. It's been great, and I really look forward to seeing how this all rolls out in the next couple of years. Thanks indeed for your time, Shah. Much appreciated.
I appreciate you, Peter. Thank you very much.
And that's all for today's program. Many thanks to Ocean Flyer CEO Shah Aslam. True North will return on Wednesday next week, the 16th of April, when I'll be quizzing Far North Mayor Moko Tapania about what's next for the region's water infrastructure, following the political culling of the controversial Three Waters initiative. What is the state of Northland's vital water infrastructure, and how are we going to afford the hefty price tag needed to bring it up to scratch? I'm Peter Heath. Thank you for listening. True North is an original podcast by Due North PR. To support our work and to stay on top of Northland business news and analysis, access the pod on Spotify, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Please do take that small extra step and subscribe, like, follow, comment, and review, as it helps others find the show. Please also share it with those who may not yet be aware that we exist. As the New Zealand media landscape continues to change, we rely on your support to continue doing what we do. Please let us know what you think about the podcast. Ask questions or make suggestions about topics and people we should feature by emailing us at truenorth@duenorthpr.co.nz. We do read every message.